Life is a quest for logic and reason. It is a quest to find balance between science and faith. Life is a quest for knowledge and understanding. But most importantly, it's a quest for personal discovery. Whatever your quest, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. Welcome to Quest. Hi, India. Welcome to the Quest podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on.
So you are my 100th guest. This is a big episode.
Huge. I know. I'm so amazed that you've made it this far because I dabbled in podcasting and I lasted one season so far, and it's a labor of love.
I started this like a week before lockdown happened, back during COVID. And when I started this podcast, I actually had like a really beautiful studio set up, and people would come to me and it was like excellent sound quality, like as perfect as could be. I got 2 episodes recorded and then the world shut down.
So you're like, damn, I have this space all to myself. What should I do?
So it became Zoom, but I've been doing these that long, 6 seasons of these. And I'm finally at 100 episodes, which is a great benchmark for me. I'm really happy. And I couldn't be, any more happy that you're my 100th guest, because I've been hounding you to do an interview for so long.
Oh, that makes me feel, excited. I haven't done an interview in a while now. So I've been taking some time off. I just had a baby.
Yeah.
And I, decided that I was going to focus on other projects while I was pregnant. And so that, made interviews less frequent than I had been doing in the past, couple years since I put out my documentary and my book in 2020.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be back because I really enjoy this way of virtually communicating.
Right. You do it right from your living room,
Yeah.
It really, the whole world of podcasting changed after COVID, because people were willing to accept lesser quality, and people were doing podcasts in their cars like crazy. So you can literally do it from your living room, from your couch if you want to. What we're probably both doing right now.
I'm in my kitchen right now because my living room has been taken over by baby things. But it's pretty cool how that happened from COVID, because we were all so desperate to connect. Once you get told that you're not allowed to be around people, you find creative ways to stay in contact. That's for sure.
For sure. And while, as of this recording, we're actually recording this with you while a hurricane's zipping by.
Yes, it did pass for the most part last night, and we didn't really get much impact where I live. But I did warn you with a text earlier, may not have power, so we might have to reschedule. But that's what it's like when you live in the Keys. But victory, we made it.
Yeah, for sure. I've been going over in my mind for days now how I introduce you.
Oh, let's hear it. I'm curious.
So I had to start making bullet points of like how I was going to do this, because there's so much you're so young and there's so much to your life already. So I'm going to just touch on the bullet points, right? Like I could introduce you as a producer and an author and an activist and a podcaster. That's the way to go. I could maybe say your lineage of royalty. Like that's another way I think to go. From a famous Hollywood family of actors. You yourself have been a model and an actress. Like that's a route of your world. Most recently, you've taken on the title of mother.
Yes, that's my most recent title.
But I think Survivor comes to mind more. What you've persevered through, and that is as in survivor of an infamous cult, which is what you've given interviews on for the last 5 years. And I think anyone who's watched the news in the last 5 years undoubtedly knows about NXIVM.
You either know about it or you don't know anything about it, which is also awesome for me.
Yeah, that's true.
It can go both ways.
I meet so many people that want to just talk about sports and they don't know anything about NXIVM. And it's like, that's like their world is so different than like what I am interested in, you know, and like the things that I pick up on and hear about.
Haven't you noticed how much more intrigue there's been about these cultic groups in the past 5 years? I feel like that's also an emergent thing from COVID, because now you go onto your streamers, whether it's Amazon, Netflix, and there's like whole sections of cults or nefarious activity or all these things that I don't remember seeing so much information as there is nowadays.
It's constant programming. I think that all these streaming services are like, they have a mandate, like, hey, we're going to need some cult programming for next season, you know?
Yeah,
And
and
they just,
unfortunately, there's plenty out there. So
there's more every day. I see of a new one that shows up, you know, and it's just, it's nuts. And, you know, I feel, you know, NXIVM's up there. If you were making a short list of cults, NXIVM's got to be in one of the top 10, you know, like,
you mean for bad behavior, or just like,
yeah,
or just people recognizing it as a
recognizing
group?
it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, I think, and these are two separate things. Like, I don't think people would classify NXIVM as a destructive cult where like the Mansons were destructive, you know, and you know, others, members killed themselves or killed others. And those are very, very destructive cults. But, I mean, NXIVM's up there at the top. Like when you're talking about Manson family, NXIVM's down there about number 7 after that.
Well, that doesn't surprise me, because one of the many things that I have learned from being in a high control group is how dangerous they are to your psychology and to um your just ability to be yourself, because you're becoming homogenized as a group, and that means you're less and less you. And
Yeah.
that to me is really dangerous, because if you're not there making the decisions, then you're basically making decisions for somebody else. And
Right.
and I think that to me is super dangerous, because no longer are you thinking with your own morality. And you know, to me, that's not that far off from these very destructive, dangerous cults, because I think that that's just the beginning of where some of these groups, especially the really power hungry leaders, are trying to take people. They don't care about you. You're just like a commodity to them.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly. Certainly. I think for those listeners, if you don't mind, India, I think for those listeners that aren't familiar with NXIVM or the Executive Success Program, could you give maybe like a brief description of what it was supposed to be versus what it became?
Yeah. Let me try my best. So I would say that NXIVM was a high control group that had a bunch of sub companies, which were sort of their, I guess, the shell behind what was really going on. And what was really going on was a lot of criminal activity. And that's what they were also charged for. Well, one of many crimes that Keith and his cohorts were charged for was racketeering, money laundering, sex trafficking, a whole bunch of other things that were going on behind the veneer of a self-help group
Yeah.
that offered classes and courses to people who could afford them. And if you couldn't afford them, then there were ways that you would become indebted and dependent on the group for your livelihood. So you'd trade your blood, sweat, and tears for classes and courses with, debt, increasing debt towards them that was kind of impossible to break out of, because you weren't really able to make any money elsewhere. And that was kind of their goal, was to keep everybody within the group, doing commerce within the group, marrying people within the group. And if that doesn't, spark a red flag in you, let it happen now, because that's something that wasn't stand out to me from the beginning. And I wish that it was, because I would have been able to maybe make some different decisions. But that's, woulda, coulda, shoulda. I can't go back in time. Like, I only knew what I knew, and what I know now is so much more regarding these high control groups, because it can be anything from a cult of one to a religious cult to which was more of like a psychological philosophical cult or a spiritual cult, and there's tons of variants, and they just sort of attract people who may have a certain vulnerability or may be looking for something to fill in their lives or feeling lost or looking for answers, and that could just about be anybody at a certain time of their lives.
Right, right. And these things are marketed very well. I remember you mentioning one of the first meetings you went to, and there were a lot of we won't name any of these names, but like there were a lot of high profile people that were there. A lot of public figures were at these things. I think anyone who's followed this as a story saw that there were other actors and different people that were in this. And that's very attractive, right? Like you'd think, oh, well, my peers are in this. How could this be bad?
Well, for some people, that's attractive. That just happened to be NXIVM's way of marketing. And I like putting it like that because every group out there has a different marketing style. And they may be, leaning more towards single mothers who don't have husbands, who are looking for community and, familial support. That could be one type of group's marketing. Whereas NXIVM used high profile people who had status or celebrity within their communities to recruit other people who they thought would add value to the group.
Right, right.
So
and
that was their style, and it worked for them to a certain extent. I mean,
right.
like, he didn't achieve world domination, which is probably what he wanted, but he did, get millions and millions of dollars out of people.
Yeah, for sure. And this ultimately escalated into kind of a notorious sex cult, which is what you hear many of the stories, the personal stories people are sharing. That's what it became. And that's what it became for you.
Well, that's because the leader was a pervert and a pedophile.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of these leaders have psychological issues, to be, polite about it. These men or women or whomever take positions of leadership so they can take advantage of people.
Right.
And that is exactly what Keith Raniere did to mostly women in his group that he thought he could turn into servants because he made himself into a pseudo god.
Why do you think, and I will say that I think this is shifting a little bit, but why do you think most cult leaders are men? These days, we actually have 2 or 3 high profile women that are kind of running cults now. I won't say who they are on this. We can talk about it off mic, but it's becoming more popular with women to do it. But why do you think it's always been men?
I think it's always been whoever, saw an opportunity to take advantage and use their charisma or their, intelligence for bad. And I think there's been political leaders who have done huge destructive acts to people, whole, communities being destroyed, whole cultures. I think that to me isn't like sex related. Like, it's not just men or just women. I think it's whomever sees an opportunity to take it to abuse power. I think unfortunately maybe men have a tendency to desire those things more: power, control, female dominance, male dominance, I don't know, whatever it is that they're going for. And so they make the news more than women, but I'm not going to, I mean, I also had female perpetrators. So I'm not going to just say that, oh yeah, it's only guys. They're, men are the worst and they're the ones causing global destruction. No, I don't believe that. I think that it's a combination of people abusing power and people relinquishing their power, and a cycle.
Well, you would say that Keith is a narcissist, right?
Yeah, but I'm also like, that label only gets you so far. Like, Keith's abused me. Keith abused a lot of people that I know and that I cared for. And so to me, he's just an abusive, bad man who deserves to be in jail. I don't need to label him a narcissist to feel better about myself. Like
Right.
I've had to do a bunch of healing on the sidebar just to have a nice life, to be able to enjoy the pleasantries of my life that I've earned and that I've also worked really hard for, that I felt for a long time had been taken from Keith because of all the psychological damage and the sexual damage that I felt a victim of his for so long. And I was like, I can't fucking live like this forever. Like,
Yeah.
if I actually want to live a free life, that means that he no longer has power over me.
Of course.
And that's not something that you can just like switch on and switch off and it all changes overnight. It's not like a magic pill. It doesn't work like that at all. Actually, you have to decide what you want to change, and then slowly you change it for yourself,
Sure.
whatever that takes. So
Yeah.
then the guy or the girl, whomever who has wronged you in your life, is no longer as powerful as they were before. But like
Right.
that's something that's taken me a long time to process. And but it's worth it. It's worth, you know, making them wrong, because they always told you that they were the most powerful, they were the smartest, you were nothing,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. So forth. You have to
Well,
take that back.
the reason why I asked the question about the title narcissist, you hear narcissist, sociopath, you hear these terms thrown around a lot with people. I've always wondered, I would think about the amount of people that I know, and I often wondered if I ever met a female narcissist. Have you ever met a female narcissist?
I would probably say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I
Yeah.
have, and I've been thinking of it because I met plenty of men that are narcissists, but
I mean,
I don't know if
I've
I've
met
ever met a female.
some women who really don't give a shit about other people.
Wow.
And I think they're probably females are better at, disguising it so that they look maybe a little more charming, because generally speaking, uh like, women are supposed to be charming and good and pleasant and, socially acceptable that way. It's less accessible. Like, you see less of a really blunt, bitchy woman who doesn't care about people, who uses people as objects. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, but it doesn't mean that they don't exist.
Today in the in the news cycle, and this has been going on for a little while, P. Diddy is in
Yeah.
jail,
Yeah.
and his empire is collapsing, and there's so many similarities between what he's being charged with and the things that he did and his tactics that like reminds me of Keith.
Mhm.
And there, in a way, there is sort of this, there's always the cult of celebrity, right?
Mhm.
But he was videotaping sexual acts and using this as collateral against people and blackmailing people and controlling people. And it's like, wow, this sounds so cultish, these P. Diddy parties. Do you see that within what you've been hearing?
Yeah, I do. And I see that it's like kind of like mob mentality, which is, you got a boss and everybody has to obey that boss because he controls people through violence and, uh, you know, criminal behavior. So that's why, for me, like, I'm not a psychologist, so it's not like for me to go in and pass a psychological judgment on somebody based on the behavior that I see. I rather just look at the facts and then decide, do I want to spend time with that person or not. Unfortunately, I was brainwashed before and I didn't have the wherewithal to think that way. Now I would be like, no way am I going to spend time with somebody who's that much of an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I value my time so much more, and I think so much better of myself now than I did before. And I think that the fact that I didn't before was one of my vulnerabilities.
I look back at, for people that, know me before the podcast, I was in Southern California for a long time. I worked in film and television and different things. And I look back at how many bullets I dodged of parties I was invited to that I didn't go to, that I would find out later were like, crazy sex parties or a child pedophile ring that celebrities were going to, directors. And I'm like, holy moly, I was invited to these things to go to. But I lived in Ventura County, so I had to drive an hour home from work.
You're like, is this cult really worth the drive?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll make the hour-and-a-half trek to see if they can recruit me.
Someone's like, go to the Celebrity Center and take a class. And I'm like, dude, I just worked like so many hours. So I got to go home. Like I got to drive an hour each way to go to.
I don't have time to join Scientology.
I think that Ventura saved me in a number of ways. People are like, why you live in Oxnard? Why you live in Ventura? Well, I'm alive today. So
yeah.
It's probably why, instead of, if I lived down the street, I probably would have had a different destructive life.
Well, you might have also been fulfilled in other parts of your life, and you may not have been looking for something in that way. So I think it could be a couple of things going on. But I do think that for the most part, and I've talked about this at length, and I say this in the documentary Seduced as well, that anyone could be susceptible to manipulation.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's better to just look at these types of groups or these types of people and go, oh, I can recognize the manipulation there. I'm going to avoid that. Instead of going, no, this could never be me, because that person may end up being manipulated because they thought that they were above it, or that they would always be able to spot it. It's better to just educate yourself on what's out there, and then be able to, have the strength inside of yourself to not need that or to avoid that.
Yeah. And it would have been a lot harder for me back then, because, I would have been a naive 22-year-old pre-social media, really pre-internet, when, there was more privacy back then.
Mm-hmm.
And it was even, pre-TMZ, like even tabloids weren't really around. Like I think a lot of people, especially older celebrities, probably feel pretty good that things that they might have done weren't really photographed or seen like they would be if they were doing it today.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, it's a whole new world.
I think I mentioned to you in one of our early conversations, I said, I think the word cult is really diluted now, because like everything's a cult. Like I saw a candy bar the other day that was like the cult candy bar, and everything's named cult. And it's like the word's thrown around so much, I don't think it has the power that it used to have. It's almost become just like an acceptable terminology to call things a cult. And I also think that almost anything can be defined as a cult. Like we could call P. Diddy's parties the cult of P. Diddy and the people that came to it. And
you could, but that's not a definition necessarily. No. So that's where I feel like it's better to just know what the word means, and then be able to make a decision based on the facts. So like, to me, someone could decide that they want to go live in, I don't know, Colorado on a ranch in a community of like-minded people who go to church and, live a nice rural life. To me, that's not a cult. You could come over to their group and say, oh yeah, I'm going to pass judgment. That group's a cult. But unless there's like abusive behavior and people are being manipulated and taken advantage of, and their free will or their psychology is being threatened, they're not allowed to think for themselves, then that's just a group of people who want to live in a community off the grid. Like, I don't have a problem with that. And I don't think you should just leave them alone, let them live. But if somebody is having their rights infringed on, whether it's physically, emotionally, psychologically, financially, that to me is problematic. And you can go about, calling that a cult, or just say like, that's a really fucked up group, or that's a really fucked up relationship. Like, it's better to be more specific and not just say, oh, that's a cult, or that's a cult, or that's a cult, because like you said, it does dilute it, and then you're not really thinking about the details.
Right. Let me ask you this. I like where this is going. I'm very curious your opinion on some of these things. So let's kind of just go out there into the weeds a little bit with this. So let's talk about Waco Branch Davidians for a minute. Branch Davidians were actually very far out Christian group. They were
Yeah.
Christian to begin with. That's what they
Yeah.
were. They were pulled off of other denominations of Christianity and wanted to do their own thing. So what you're saying is, when that became something where David Koresh wanted multiple wives and wanted to have sex with all these women and children and all this, that's where it became a cult. Whereas if it was
Yeah.
just whatever their teachings in Christianity, even if it was out in the middle of nowhere, that's acceptable. But when he did things illegal, that's when it became a cult. Am I right? That's what you would.
I would say that it's up to you if you want to call it a cult or not. You could call it a community, you could call it whatever. I think there's a huge problem with the fact that he wanted to have sex with children. That to me is a crime that is punishable, and like that person should be removed from society. I personally don't agree with polygamy. It's not my lifestyle. It's not something that I promote or I believe in. But if consenting adults decide that they want to have relationships with multiple people, and there isn't an inversion of power where one person controls all the other women's or men's behavior, I can't really pass judgment on that. That's just their life. That's what they want to do.
Right.
But yeah, but there's a fine line, and it's very easy for those types of dynamics to have inversions of power.
Sure.
And
Let
that
me
to
ask.
me is a problem, because that means that the other person doesn't feel free or powerful enough to say no to that other person, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think, as everyone really knows, if you know your history on it, it ended very badly for the Branch Davidians. Government came in, the whole building burned down, almost everyone was killed. Very few survivors from that. Even children were killed. And that's always been a thing that people have argued the government over, of whether they use too much force to get these people to come out. And it's still argued today about their excessive use of force. Let me go to the other end of the spectrum here. Let's say, I don't know if you're familiar with this group. It's called Urantia. And they are.
Yeah, I have. Sorry, my baby just got back and she's really hungry, so I'm just gonna feed her.
Oh, we have a special guest.
Yes, we do. But yes, I have heard of that group, and I mean, when you were just talking about that other group, I thought of Jonestown, because to me that's just, it's really bad. But also think about the leadership of those groups. I mean, the leaders of those groups, they were mentally unwell.
Right.
And it was well documented that they were mentally unwell. So you should also, if you decide to be a follower of something or anything, look at, oh, sorry, baby. If you decide, I'll be quiet for 1 second. If you decide to be a follower of anything, look at the leadership.
Of course. What's interesting about Urantia is you don't know who the leadership is, right? They sort of have their foundation. It's faceless. They have their main Bible, which is about, we were seeded by UFOs, and that's what we are, UFO people. And they kind of want everyone to buy the Urantia book. And then there's a lot of other supplementary material by authors that you can't find. So it's a weird cult that seems to be faceless, that isn't destructive, but it's indoctrinating people into this way of thinking. Would you call that a cult? Or are we just buying fiction books and being taken in by it?
I mean, there's a lot of people who, this is a really interesting question, because there's a lot of people who read lots of books that are either called religious texts, there's Bibles, there's all sorts of books out there that teach people certain lessons and meanings about life. It's then, wow, sorry. It's what that person then does with that information or that lesson that, to me, makes it good or bad. It's not like the book.
Yeah, it's morally neutral,
I mean?
then, I guess, is what you're saying.
I haven't read it, but that's usually my opinion about a book. Unless the book is telling you to go out and hurt people or do bad things, then it's your decision how you interpret that, and do you actually act on that? Do you act on it or not?
Right.
Because the book told you to go eat strawberry ice cream, do you now have to go eat strawberry ice cream or the world is going to fall apart and end and your family
Right.
is cursed for 7 generations?
Right. Right.
Like, do you know what I mean? That's why I can't even say like, "Oh yeah, your ranch is a cult." I don't know. I do know people who follow that book, who like that text, who have read those books, and I think that they're fine people. And there's people that I've met that have also read or I haven't met that I know read those books who I think are assholes.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny.
So,
Yeah, it's fascinating to me what people well, it was crazy to me when fans of Star Wars wanted Jedi to become a religion. I was like, what?
right.
This is
Right.
nuts.
Okay. It's but that's like the same kind of thing that we're talking about because it it shows you that you do have the choice to, follow what you want to follow, but if you follow blindly, that can be dangerous.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I think, anyone who wants to hear your story more, you're out there on YouTube. You can browse a wealth of interviews that you've given. You've there's I think clips from Good Morning America, Ellen, Entertainment Tonight, Dr. Oz. Like you did the rounds of all of these talking about NXIVM, and there's certainly a lot of other people that survived it that have done their own podcast and books and things like that.
Mhm.
How did you look at what other people's stories were, or was it just did it hurt too much to want to hear what other people went through? And if you did look at other people's stories, did you think, wow, they had a uniquely different experience than me? Or what's your take on your peers from the group that have talked?
Those who have put out, books or documentaries on Nexium, I didn't actually read or watch them. And that was
Is
mostly because I had lived it, so I felt like I didn't need the to additionally, like, re-traumatize myself any more than I already was at that time.
right.
And so I've, since then, I've obviously talked to people. I feel like that's been the most valuable for me is to just get on the phone with someone or have a coffee. And in the early days, I did a lot more of that because it was almost like they were filling in other sides of the story that I didn't experience or see. So it could be helpful, but it can also be shocking. Like, oh my God, you really did uh, have a different experience than me, better or for worse. But overall, I've tried to just process what it was like for me because that's been more valuable than constantly reliving the past.
I was curious because, I think you see this a lot when there's a disaster. Like people have so many different perspectives. And although I wasn't living in New York when 9/11 happened, I've talked to a lot of people that were there, that participated in the cleanup or in rescue efforts. And I just have heard so many different takes on it from so many different angles. And I wondered if it was like that and if you knew about that. Um, so yeah, it's kind of like how everyone views the disaster in a different way.
Completely. And then that could also cause a lot of turmoil. It's funny because that can also happen in a family where like you have a traumatic event or a cult that makes the news. You have a traumatic event or people are being abused or bad things are happening within the family and everybody sees it from a different viewpoint. And so often people will get upset. They'll call you a liar. They'll say, that's not what happened. And I saw that happen within the group too. And I was like, wait a minute, like what happened to people having a different experience that's totally valid.
Right. Right.
So
You told your story in a show you produced for Starz. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience and doing that? And did
yeah,
did that show help you heal?
it definitely helped me heal because it allowed me to pull together a lot of major pieces that made the crimes and 120-year sentence makes sense to me. Because while I was in the group, I thought everything was so great for the most part. I was I was lost in a delusion of what they were telling me it was, and I didn't have enough of a sense of myself to be able to question it. So being able to question things and put together that documentary with other survivors and experts and peers and family members was really important for me. It gave me a lot of strength and confidence, but it was also really challenging, and emotionally taxing. And I so like since putting that out, I've had a lot of people come to me, ask for advice on telling their own stories. And as much as I thought that it was valuable for me, I don't necessarily think that putting yourself out in a public platform uh, for a personal experience is always the best thing for someone. So I sometimes will say, like, well, if you have your anonymity, that's a really valuable thing. You may just want to like go about your life, do your healing at your own pace without, public opinion. And then maybe put out your experience through your music or through art or through a book, or there's so many other ways to express yourself if that's what you think that you need to feel whole.
Yeah. And that show's called Seduced, and that's 4 parts, right?
Yes, it's a
Yeah.
4-part docuseries, and it really just shows the inside perspective of what it was like to be somebody who was under the influence of this high control group called NXIVM.
Yeah, yeah. And I've known other people that were in NXIVM with uniquely different perspectives of what happened. And although I had met you years and years and years ago, we didn't really connect and become friends until just recently. And I have to say, I didn't have Starz, right? So like I wasn't able to like watch that for a while. So I started with The Vow and some other things and watched all the news stories. I was like really into what this was about.
Well,
And
that was valuable too, because it's all educational when it comes down to it. I mean, some of it is entertaining because people are learning about what these groups are like, whether it's from a whistleblower perspective or from a survivor perspective. It's different, but also similar learnings.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So to see how you were portrayed on The Vow versus what I watched when I did eventually watch Seduced, it really changed my opinion on you. And I just felt like you really were so vulnerable in Seduced. And I really loved, and this isn't just because I know you and like you, like I feel that's one of the best documentaries that's been done from a first person perspective like that. It's really, really nice. And again, talking to people that were part of this, some public figures, some not, it's weird to see the disaster from these different points of view.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been really interesting. I'm curious, this group was New York based, and you spent many years in New York. Do you have a love-hate with New York now? Like when you go back there, is it weird to be there? Because I've definitely had places where I had bad experiences and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to go to Huntsville, Alabama anymore. Like that was hard on me when I was 30, but like, how do you feel fitting into New York now?
I mean, I love it now,
Mm-hmm.
but I definitely had that love-hate relationship with a few locations from my 20s. But I also feel like that's another big part of healing is taking that back too, because you don't want a beautiful place like New York City or Los Angeles or, some of the places that I lived in to be tainted forever.
Yeah.
And for me, I couldn't let New York City become that because I love it too much. So
yeah,
I no longer feel that way.
When I left LA, I was really bitter about it because, how entertainment is. It chews you up and spits you out. Like it's such an ugly, toxic, dirty industry. And it took a long time. Like, and it wasn't just the job. It was the pollution and the commute and like all the other stuff. Like I had it. And when I left there, I did not want to go back. And it took almost 15 years for me to be able to go back to LA and go, hey, this feels good now. and I could go back to the places where I used to, hang out or work, and like not have that weird, like it wasn't bad anymore. Like it had all dissipated, and I could appreciate Southern California again. But it took a
Yeah, well,
while.
I grew up there, so I do have a lot of love for it, and but I completely can relate to what you're saying about
Yeah.
needing space to
I
then
didn't
be
I
able to
didn't
see it.
want it to be ugly forever, but I did have to wait it out a little bit to be able to feel good there again. You've hinted at so many interesting stories of your time in in the cult, and we're not going into those in this interview for a reason. For one, I think you have a great chronicle of your story of being involved with NXIVM in your audiobook, which is called Still Learning, which people should go listen to. But we are actually publishing for the first time a hard copy version of the audiobook. You and I have been working on this for a while, and it's got updated chapters. It's got some new information, some new additions to it, and we're excited about that. So we want you to hear her full story in print. How do you feel about seeing those first galley copies printed in your hands?
So excited and so proud. I really wanted my book to be in print. And when I got the opportunity to record the audio, I was really excited for that too. Plus it was 2020, so it was the heat of the lockdown, so I didn't see a book tour in my, foreseeable future.
Right.
So now to be able to take this book out and feel a physical copy in my hand just feels like an exciting way to close that chapter and enter into the next phase of my life.
For sure. Yeah. I kept asking you if you ever wanted to publish it, and it took a little convincing. And I thought, we could update it. We could add some more stuff in, because a little time's passed. And I love the audiobook. I only exclusively listen to audiobooks, to be honest. I have a publishing company, but I just listen to audiobooks. Is weird.
You like what you like.
But you know what I like? I like the author reading to me. It's such a better story than me reading it. Like it's just, I don't think it gets any better than that, because you just feel like you're getting it. This is as firsthand as it comes, So I enjoy audiobooks, and I really liked your audiobook. And I had so many questions about things that happened. And I said, let's update this and put it out as a book, because you don't want to spend the rest of your life talking about this, because that defines you as this is the person, like Squeaky Fromme is always going to be, Manson's right hand. Would never have a chance in a million years to be anything else other than that. And we know what your next act looks like,
Well, I like to think that it's a lot more than what it has been. I have a family now. I have a whole new life that I never really saw for myself when I was in the group. So I do feel really lucky to be able to be in this next chapter, and to continue to just learn and write and produce and do things that I'm passionate about, but not necessarily reliving my story over and over again.
Yeah.
But maybe helping others tell theirs.
Yeah.
And so that's really important to me, and that's something that brings me a lot of joy and healing.
I think we were looking at, let's put this book out and kind of close the book on this. And so you can move on to other things, and Still Learning is becoming your brand. It's on everything that you do, and it's a mark that you own. And I think this Still Learning enterprise, as it moves forward, is going to be really amazing for people to see what you have coming in the future. And
I really hope so. I really hope so. That would be amazing.
You have a podcast called Still Learning, and it's gone one season. Tell the listeners a little about what that podcast was and what you talked about.
Well, it was similar to what I think your objective is to just have candid, raw conversations about topics that interest you. And it happened to be that Still Learning season 1 is about programming, about cultic groups, about healing, about we talk about psychedelics, we talk about all sorts of things that have become personal interests of mine over the past couple years, and also have been things that I've been interested in for most of my life. Like I love learning about people and hearing their stories and seeing what has impacted them and why they do what they do. So I feel like Still Learning season 1 has a lot of that vibe going for it. And it was also my first time producing a podcast, and I just kind of did it as an experiment with my friend and co-producer of that season, Madigan, and she taught me a lot. She's been podcasting for years, and it was a creative exploration that may lead to more things in the future.
Yeah. Do you think there'll be a season 2?
There could be.
Could be. All right.
Yes.
Well, everyone go take a listen to that podcast, because I'm a fan of it myself. I love listening to that first season, and you're right. Like, I love to have interesting, compelling guests, people that have persevered through things or have exceptional stories, and you definitely get that. There's definitely a lot of knowledge to pull from the Still Learning podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, and I like to keep it light too. Like, a lot of what we talk about is heavy stuff, and you have to give it the respect that it deserves, but also being able to laugh and just bring some levity to certain tough situations can really help.
Levity is the word, for sure.
Yeah.
I use that a lot. Tell me about Helix 180.
Helix 180 is a part of the Catherine Oxenberg Foundation, a foundation that my mom started and that I've helped work on with her. That is mostly focused on PTSD recovery and finding options for people who have experienced trauma, also like sexual abuse and in that realm. So we focus mostly on women, but in the future, we obviously would like to expand our reach. But it was just a great foundation that I've been able to work with my mother, and we hope to be able to expand it in the future.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I've seen you speak at that, and you do great. So I'm always wanting people to promote what they're out doing. The new memoir, Still Learning, comes out on October 28th, and you'll probably see us putting pictures of the book up and promoting it on our social media. It will be out anywhere you get your books. So it'll be at Barnes and Noble, and it'll be at Amazon, and it'll be available through the publisher's website, eventually on India's website, and in bookstores all over. So be looking for that. And I'm hoping, I know you got a little one right now, but we're hoping we can get you out on a book tour and maybe do some speaking engagements when you're in those cities.
I would love to do that.
Awesome. So be looking for India next year around the country in some select cities, and you'll be able to find that information on our social media and our websites. And speaking of that, how can people find you out there on social media and the interwebs?
Well, they can find me on Instagram at India Oxenberg, or at Still Learning, the podcast. It's also on Instagram. And you can email me from there as well if you want to get in contact. And I hope that you do. And I would love to hear from you if you have any questions or engagements or collaborations.
Perfect. India, I'm grateful for our friendship and that you could take the time today during a hurricane to do this on this special 100th episode.
Thank you. Thank you for all of your support. And I look forward to putting out this book in hard and soft copy with you.
Yeah, it's been exciting to work on this and do this and produce this book out for you. And hopefully there's more in the future.
I hope so too.
And we'll talk soon.
Speak soon.
Take care.
Metacortex Publishing hopes that you've enjoyed this presentation.
Please take a moment to listen to some other podcast offerings from Metacortex Publishing.
The Danceology podcast interviews the great masters of dance, the working professionals starring in today's most exciting shows, and the rising stars ready to amp up the craft. I'm your host, Edyta Slavinska from Dancing with the Stars. Join me as I dive into the world of dance, uncovering unique stories and the fascinating personalities of industry professionals on Danceology.
Hi, I'm Father Daniel Duplantis, a Catholic priest, martial artist, and host of the Karate Priest podcast. Have you ever wondered what the church teaches about different topics? Are you a martial arts enthusiast or just someone who wants to learn more about martial arts? I'd like to invite you to join me and many guests on my podcast as we cover topics of faith, everyday living, and martial arts on the Karate Priest podcast.
The No Earthly Explanation podcast investigates the things that are unexplainable, hosted by world-renowned investigative researcher Donald R. Schmidt and scientist Ellie Ringo. Follow them as they look for evidence for things that have no earthly explanation. Available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Every year, tennis players from around the world compete for excellence, triumphing against all odds to emerge the champions. I'm your host, Maddie Harrison. Join me as I get up close and personal with these dynamic individuals and find out what it takes to go for greatness. Let's go beyond the match.
Cult Following is a podcast that studies the personalities and common traits of cult leaders and their followers. Get the real story behind these infamous and oftentimes tragic cults from a new perspective, through exhaustive research, and from interviews with people that were there. Available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Hi everybody, I'm Amber Rose, the religious hippie, and I host the podcast A Catholic's Perspective. Join me every 2 weeks as I release episodes targeted towards helping young Catholics navigate their ever-changing secular world while staying strong in their faith. Whether you are a Catholic or not, all are welcome here. So if this is something that interests you, feel free to tune in. You can find A Catholic's Perspective on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I hope to see you there. Bye!
Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Todd Fischer and Anthony Smith and is distributed by Metacortex Publishing. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions stated in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure to visit the official website for Metacortex Publishing at metacortexpublishing.com or find us on social media for other unique content.